Friedrich Nietzsche, the 19th century philosopher whose radical ideas reshaped Western thought, remains an enigma, not only for his provocative philosophy, but also for the mysterious psychological collapse that defined the final decade of his life. On January 3, 1889, in Turin, Italy, Nietzsche reportedly threw his arms around a horse to protect it from being whipped, an act that marked the onset of what is widely regarded as his madness. From that moment until his death in 1900, Nietzsche was largely incapacitated, his once brilliant mind seemingly lost to incoherence. Yet the nature of this madness, whether it was a descent into psychological chaos, a deliberate performance, or a transcendent state of divine ecstasy, remains one of the most debated aspects of his legacy. The opening quote from Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil encapsulates the perilous journey he undertook. He enters a labyrinth and multiplies 1,000-fold the dangers that life in itself brings with it, of which not the least is that nobody can see how and where he loses his way, becomes solitary, and is torn to pieces by some cave minotaur of conscience. This vivid metaphor of the labyrinth, with its lurking dangers and existential isolation, reflects Nietzsche's lifelong engagement with the depths of the human psyche. Drawing on the psychological insights of Carl Jung, who navigated similar inner territories, and the ancient Greek concept of divine mania, this article explores whether Nietzsche succumbed to madness in his confrontation with the unconscious, deliberately masked his psychological state, or achieved a state of profound rebirth and renewal, what he termed the great health. By examining Nietzsche's writings, letters, and the accounts of those closest to him, we seek to unravel the mystery of his final years and the transformative potential of his descent. To probe the nature of Nietzsche's psychological state, we turn to Carl Jung, whose pioneering work in depth psychology offers a framework for understanding the dangers and rewards of confronting the unconscious. In Symbols of Transformation, Jung describes the treasure hard to attain, a metaphor for the transformative potential hidden within the unconscious, a potential that promises psychological rebirth but demands immense courage to attain. Jung writes, "In the darkness of the unconscious a treasure lies hidden. The fight against the paralyzing grip of the unconscious calls forth man's creative powers. It needs heroic courage to do battle with these forces and to wrest from them the treasure hard to attain. Whoever succeeds in this has triumphed indeed." Jung's own experiences provide a parallel to Nietzsche's journey. At the age of 38, Jung employed a technique he called active imagination to engage with the contents of his unconscious, a process he described in Memories, Dreams, Reflections as a plunge into dark depths. He recounts, "I was sitting at my desk, thinking over my fears. Then I let myself drop. Suddenly it was as though the ground literally gave way at my feet, and I plunged down into dark depths." These confrontations, recorded in his Red Book and Black Books, were fraught with tension and the recurring fear of psychosis. I stood helpless before an alien world. Everything in it seemed difficult and incomprehensible. I was living in a constant state of tension. Often I felt as if gigantic blocks of stone were tumbling down upon me. Jung's ability to navigate these depths without succumbing to madness relied heavily on the stability of his external life. As a respected psychiatrist with a family, a career, and social obligations, Jung had anchors that grounded him. "It was most essential for me to have a normal life in the real world, as a counterpoise to that strange inner world. The unconscious contents could have driven me out of my wits, but my family and the knowledge, I have a medical diploma. I must help my patients. I have a wife and 5 children. These were actualities which made demands upon me and proved to me again and again that I really existed." Nietzsche, by contrast, lacked such grounding. A solitary figure, he had no family of his own, no stable career, and few close relationships. After resigning his professorship at the University of Basel in 1879 due to ill health, Nietzsche lived a nomadic existence, moving between boarding houses in Switzerland, Italy, and Germany. His social isolation and physical suffering, marked by migraines, nausea, convulsions, and visual hallucinations, left him vulnerable to the overwhelming forces of the unconscious. Jung hypothesized Nietzsche had lost the ground under his feet because he possessed nothing more than the inner world of his thoughts, which incidentally possessed him more than he it. He was uprooted and hovered above the earth, and therefore he succumbed to exaggeration and irreality. Jung's concept of psychic inflation provides a lens for interpreting Nietzsche's psychological state in early 1889. Psychic inflation occurs when the conscious ego identifies with the powerful, archetypal contents of the unconscious, leading to an exaggerated sense of self. Jung explains in Mysterium Conjunctionis, the approach or invasion of the unconscious can cause a dangerous inflation. For one of the most obvious dangers is that of identifying with the figures in the unconscious. For anyone with an unstable disposition, this may amount to a psychosis. Nietzsche's letters from January 1889 offer compelling evidence of this phenomenon. To Jacob Burckhardt, he wrote, "When it comes right down to it, I'd much rather have been a Basel professor than God. But I didn't dare be selfish enough to forgo the creation of the world." To Cosima Wagner, he declared, "It is a mere prejudice that I am a human being. Among the Hindus I was Buddha. In Greece, Dionysus. Alexander and Caesar were incarnations of me. I also hung on the cross." These grandiose claims, identifying himself with divine and historical figures, suggest that Nietzsche's conscious mind may have been engulfed by the archetypal forces of the unconscious, resulting in a state of psychic inflation. The narrative of Nietzsche's descent into madness is complicated by his own accounts of his psychological and physical state in the months leading up to his breakdown. For much of his adult life, Nietzsche endured debilitating physical ailments, including migraines, nausea, convulsions, and visual hallucinations, which often left him bedridden and questioning the value of existence. These symptoms, possibly linked to an organic condition such as neurosyphilis or severe psychosomatic distress, dominated his daily life. Yet, in the autumn of 1888, Nietzsche reported a dramatic transformation. In a letter to his friend Heinrich Köselitz, Peter Gast, on September 27, 1888, he wrote, "Marvelous clarity, autumnal colors, an exquisite feeling of well-being on all things." This period of vitality coincided with an extraordinary burst of creative output. Between September and November 1888, Nietzsche composed his autobiography, Ecce Homo, How One Becomes What One Is, along with other works such as The Antichrist and Twilight of the Idols. In Ecce Homo, he describes a state of unprecedented health and contentment. "Whoever saw me during the 70 days this fall will not have noticed any trace of tension in me, but rather an overflowing freshness and cheerfulness. I never ate with more pleasant feelings. I never slept better." He further claims to have overcome his suffering, stating, "I took myself in hand. I made myself healthy again. I discovered life anew, including myself. I tasted all good and even little things, as others cannot easily taste them. I turned my will to health, to life, into a philosophy." These passages suggest that Nietzsche believed he had achieved what he called the great health, a state of psychological and existential renewal that allowed him to transcend his suffering. This aligns with Jung's concept of the treasure hard to attain, the transformative potential of the unconscious that enables rebirth. Nietzsche's philosophy, particularly his emphasis on the will to power and the affirmation of life in the face of suffering, reflects this transformative process. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he writes, "That which does not kill me makes me stronger," a maxim that encapsulates his belief in the redemptive power of adversity. The autumn of 1888 appears to have been a moment when Nietzsche not only endured his suffering but transformed it into a source of strength and creativity. However, this period of vitality raises a critical question. If Nietzsche was on the brink of madness, how could he experience such clarity and productivity just months before his collapse? The contrast between his reported health and his subsequent breakdown suggests that his psychological state was far more complex than a straightforward descent into insanity. It is possible that Nietzsche's newfound health was a prelude to his confrontation with the unconscious, a moment of equilibrium before the plunge into deeper, more dangerous territory. Another layer of complexity emerges from accounts suggesting that Nietzsche's madness may not have been a straightforward psychological or organic breakdown. Observations from those closest to him, including his mother Franziska Oehler and his friend Franz Overbeck, hint at the possibility that Nietzsche's behavior was, at least in part, a performance. In The Madness of Nietzsche by Erich Podack, Franziska recounts an intriguing observation from Nietzsche's time in a mental asylum. "Yesterday, the inspector of the sanatorium told me about Nietzsche. He doesn't speak two words which make sense, and with the doctor and me, he does not speak a single confused word. Isn't that strange?" Franz Overbeck, who visited Nietzsche in February 1890, expressed similar doubts. In The Madness of Nietzsche, he describes Nietzsche's madness as a catastrophe as sudden as a flash of lightning, and admits to a horrible suspicion that it might be simulated. Overbeck's suspicion was rooted in his long familiarity with Nietzsche's tendency toward self-concealment and spiritual masks, a trait Nietzsche himself acknowledged in Beyond Good and Evil. Every profound spirit needs a mask. Moreover, around every profound spirit, a mask is continually growing. Nietzsche's philosophy often blurred the line between authenticity and performance, as seen in his adoption of various personas, from the prophetic Zarathustra to the Dionysian reveler. Could his erratic behavior in 1889 have been an extension of this performative impulse, a deliberate act to shock, provoke, or retreat from a world that had largely rejected him? The idea of Nietzsche's madness as a mask aligns with his philosophical project, which challenged conventional notions of truth and identity. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche writes, "We are all actors, and the better we act, the more we are ourselves." This suggests that performance was not merely a facade for Nietzsche, but a means of exploring and expressing his authentic self. However, maintaining such a performance for over a decade until his death seems implausible, particularly given the physical and emotional toll it would have required. Moreover, Nietzsche's letters from January 1889, with their grandiose and disjointed tone, suggest a genuine alteration in his psychological state, whether induced by psychic inflation, divine mania, or an organic condition. Beyond the theories of psychological breakdown or performance lies a third possibility, that Nietzsche's so-called madness was not madness at all, but a state of divine mania, as understood in ancient Greek thought. In Plato's Phaedrus, divine mania is distinguished from madness caused by human disease, described as a divine release from the customary habits. This altered state of consciousness was seen as a gift from the gods, enabling poets, prophets, and mystics to transcend ordinary perception and access profound truths. The ancient Greeks recognized four types of divine mania: prophetic, ritual, poetic, and erotic, each associated with a specific deity, such as Apollo, Dionysus, the Muses, or Eros. The 19th century poet Alfred Tennyson provides a vivid description of such a state, which he called a waking trance. In The Divine Mania by Yulia Ustinova, Tennyson recounts an experience where his individuality itself seemed to dissolve and fade away into boundless being. Not a confused state, but the clearest of the clearest, the weirdest of the weirdest, utterly beyond words, where death was an almost laughable impossibility. This description resonates with Nietzsche's accounts of his psychological state in late 1888, particularly his sense of clarity, vitality, and transcendence. Yulia Ustinova argues that modern Western culture often pathologizes non-ordinary states of consciousness, equating them with mental illness. In Divine Mania, Alteration of Consciousness in Ancient Greece, she writes, The reluctance to acknowledge that being in a non-ordinary state of consciousness is not synonymous to being mad is characteristic of our culture, which tends to medicalize the nonconformities, especially behavioral deviance. In historical and cultural situations different from the modern Western norm, people take for granted that a person may be out of his or her mind, but not crazy. This perspective is particularly relevant to Nietzsche, whose behavior in 1889 was quickly labeled as madness by medical professionals, despite evidence suggesting a more nuanced psychological state. Nietzsche's lifelong fascination with the Greek god Dionysus provides a key to understanding his possible experience of divine mania. In The Birth of Tragedy, Nietzsche describes Dionysus as the god of intoxication, ecstasy, and primal unity, contrasting him with Apollo, the god of order and individuation. Dionysus, Nietzsche writes, represents the collapse of the principium individuationis, a dissolution of the self into a collective, ecstatic experience. Nietzsche called himself the last disciple and initiate of the god Dionysus, and his philosophy increasingly embraced Dionysian themes of liberation, creativity, and the affirmation of life in the face of suffering. Walter Otto, in Dionysus, Myth and Cult, describes Dionysian madness as no sickness, no disability in life, but a companion of life at its healthiest, which ushers in primal salvation amid primal pain. This description aligns with Nietzsche's transformation in the autumn of 1888, when he reported overcoming his physical and psychological suffering. Strikingly, Nietzsche's breakdown on January 3, 1889, coincided with the traditional winter festival of Dionysus, a time when the god was believed to make his most tumultuous entry. In a letter written on that day, Nietzsche declared, "I come as the victorious Dionysus, who will make the earth a festival." This statement, far from indicating derangement, could be interpreted as Nietzsche embracing a Dionysian state of ecstatic liberation, a celebration of his victory over the suffering that had plagued him. After his institutionalization in 1889, Nietzsche returned to live under the care of his mother and later his sister. During these final years, he was largely mute, often appearing detached, as if reposing above himself, on the peaks of his mind. His sister Elizabeth reported that he would occasionally offer concise, intelligible comments, such as asking, "Are we not quite happy?" a remark that Jung interpreted as evidence of a nirvana condition, or divine mania. In Nietzsche's Zarathustra, Jung notes, "People have concluded that his madness was a divine mania, what the Greeks called mania, a divine state, the state of being filled with the god. One is entheos, the god is within." Nietzsche's own writings foreshadow this state of profound silence and transcendence. In The Dawn of Day, he writes in the aphorism, "In the great silence, now all is still. The sea lies there pale and glittering, it cannot speak. Shall he surrender to you? Shall he become as you now are, pale, glittering, mute, tremendous, reposing above himself, exalted above himself?" This passage suggests that Nietzsche envisioned a state of consciousness that transcended ordinary human experience, a state that might appear to others as madness but was, in fact, a form of spiritual elevation. Similarly, the aphorism, "How one ought to turn to stone," encapsulates this idea. Slowly, slowly to become hard like a precious stone, and at last to lie there, silent, and a joy to eternity. If Nietzsche's final years were marked by divine mania, these aphorisms could be seen as prophetic descriptions of his psychological state, a state of silent, crystalline clarity, detached from the mundane concerns of the world. The mystery of Nietzsche's madness extends beyond the question of his psychological state to broader questions about the nature of genius, creativity, and the human condition. Nietzsche's philosophy, with its emphasis on overcoming suffering, embracing chaos, and affirming life, reflects his own struggle to navigate the labyrinth of the psyche. His engagement with the unconscious, whether it led to madness or transcendence, was an act of profound courage, embodying his call to live dangerously and become who you are. The ambiguity surrounding Nietzsche's final years mirrors the ambiguity of his philosophy, which resists definitive interpretation. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche writes, "I am a bridge to the Overman," suggesting that his life and work were a transition to a new mode of being, one that transcends the limitations of the human condition. Whether Nietzsche's madness was a breakdown, a performance, or a divine mania, it serves as a powerful symbol of this transition, challenging us to reconsider the boundaries between sanity and insanity, suffering and salvation, the human and the divine. Nietzsche's influence on modern thought is profound, shaping existentialism, psychoanalysis, and postmodernism. His ideas about the will to power, the death of God, and the eternal recurrence continue to resonate, inviting us to confront the challenges of existence with courage and creativity. The mystery of his madness only deepens his allure, reminding us that the greatest minds often dwell at the edge of the abyss, where danger and transformation converge. The question of whether Nietzsche succumbed to madness, performed it, or transcended it in a state of divine mania remains unresolved, a labyrinth as complex as the philosopher himself. Each perspective, Jung's psychological analysis, the possibility of a deliberate mask, and the ancient concept of divine mania, offers a compelling lens through which to view his final years. The evidence is ambiguous. Nietzsche's grandiose letters suggest psychic inflation, yet his accounts of vitality and health in late 1888 point to a profound transformation. Observations of his selective behavior in the asylum raise the possibility of performance, while his lifelong engagement with Dionysian themes supports the idea of a divine, ecstatic state. Perhaps the truth lies in a synthesis of these perspectives. Nietzsche, ever the paradox, may have simultaneously lost himself in the labyrinth of the unconscious and found the treasure of rebirth. His identification with Dionysus, the god of both destruction and creation, suggests a state of being that defies binary categorization as either mad or sane. As Jung noted, Nietzsche's remark, "Are we not quite happy?" hints at a state of serene transcendence, a nirvana condition that aligns with the ancient Greek understanding of divine mania. Ultimately, Nietzsche's madness will remain shrouded in mystery, a testament to his fearless exploration of the human psyche. His life and work challenge us to question the boundaries between madness and genius, suffering and salvation, the human and the divine. In the end, Nietzsche's descent into the unconscious, whether it led to madness, performance, or transcendence, stands as a profound example of the transformative potential of confronting the unknown, a journey that continues to inspire and unsettle us today.